Welcome to Mentoring in Real Life, where we talk about what it takes to find and be a great mentor. I'm Angela, and together with my co-host Bill, we know the power of mentoring and what it can do in your life on both sides of the table. If you're interested in learning tips, tricks, and hearing stories about mentoring, you're in the right place. Come join us. Hey Bill, how you doing today?
Never been this happy. How about you, Angela?
I am tippy-tappy.
Awesome. Well, a question that we frequently get from folks, particularly some of the more junior folks who are, new to the workplace, is whether it's okay to have a supervisor as a mentor. Clearly, this is a person who's invested in your work life, your productivity, and helping you grow in your current position. Does that make him a good candidate as a mentor? Well, as you might expect, it depends. We certainly would say that supervisors have mentoring functions that are inherent in the job description, but they help you build specific technical skills for your current tasks, and they're responsible for ensuring that you're building good team skills. However, there's aspects of the supervisor-employee relationship that would limit the scope of that being appropriate for the supervisor. So let's get into it and talk about what makes sense for having a supervisor as one of your mentors and why you should have additional mentors outside the supervisory chain. So anything you want to add to that, partner?
No, the bottom line at the top here is we're saying that, yes, supervisors can be mentors or at least have mentoring type of skills. And we recommend that there are some things that you don't talk to your supervisor about that you would actually talk to a mentor about. And we're going to get into all of that. And so let's first talk about when a supervisor can be a good mentor. What are those instances that make it okay for your supervisor to be in a mentoring kind of capacity? And a supervisor is well positioned to mentor you on things like role-specific growth. So what does great look like in the job you have right now? Or organizational navigation. What are some of the politics, especially in your particular unit, your division, your department, and so forth? What are the priorities of the organization, or whether that's at the organizational level at large or even down at your lower level within the organization? Or about timing, when it comes to timing on finding new jobs and such. A supervisor could bring good mentoring to each of those areas. In addition, let's remember our supervisor, their job is to give you evaluation on how you are performing, right? Your job. And they're the ones that help influence bonus structures and raises and all of that. And so they can give you mentorship on how that performance evaluation process works internal to the organization, so you understand how decisions are made and what gets rewarded and can modify your behavior accordingly. Supervisors can also provide you with visibility to where they can advocate for any kind of stretch work, any work that's beyond your existing performance expectations inside of the team. And so good supervisors give you regular feedback as part of their job. And knowing what type of feedback they're giving will help scope if they are in more of a mentoring capacity or if they're conducting more of a performance evaluation. And so for those two types of feedback, there's one that's evaluating your performance and the other one that's focused on your development. So for example, if you have performance parameters, like if you have technical requirements you're being evaluated on within your performance evaluation, leadership requirements as an example, your supervisor will give you feedback on how you're being evaluated along those requirements. But it's important to note that your supervisor, inherently as part of the evaluation process, is likely comparing you against your peers. You will likely not know how specifically you are evaluated against your peers, but you might hear things like, "You're not a standout at X yet," or "I'd like to see improvement at Y." And that's all related to your evaluation level parameters. So in addition, you may get developmental feedback from your supervisor. So not just how they're evaluating you against your performance expectations, but rather recommendations on how you should develop. So, for example, in order to be considered for, a different role, I suggest you work on your presentation skills, which will give you the visibility needed for the job.
Yeah, so it sort of sounds like, in summary, you're saying the supervisor may be taking on a mentoring role if he or she is giving you performance and developmental feedback and is invested in your long-term growth, even beyond the current role, and is able to separate coaching conversations from performance reviews. So in that case, yes, mentoring can absolutely happen with your supervisor.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, now, this can be a little bit tricky, but it's more structural than personal. It certainly is not because of whoever you are. The supervisor has the job to evaluate you. They control your pay, your promotion, your performance ratings, and their job is to represent the organization's interests first, and sometimes their own team's interests. So in other words, if you're really good, the supervisor might be reluctant to let you go to another team if they don't see a substantial advantage for your growth in moving you off to the new team.
Yeah, that's so true. And so because of that, you might hold back on sharing any doubts that you have or failures or career aspirations outside the team, especially if it comes with leadership concerns that you have, as you see concerns that you have in your leadership up the chain. You might also avoid asking any kind of naive questions or vulnerable questions, such as, personal goals or family related goals that could imply that you have one foot out the door. Example of that, Bill, that comes to mind is if you have an intent to move to a location where the company doesn't have a presence, or an intent to move to another company, using your current company as a stepping stone to get there, maybe don't tell your supervisor these kind of things. They might be good things to share with your mentor, but not with your supervisor. Do you have a comment on that before we move on?
Well, so there's nothing inherently wrong with those kinds of goals, but sharing with the supervisor comes with risk, right? So especially if they're considering performance bonuses, pay raises, providing you with a promotion or opportunity, with more senior or expanded roles in the organization, you just got to realize that, when you share with your direct supervisor, you may be getting mentoring that's sort of unconsciously biased towards what they need from you. It's not malicious. It's just the tendencies as humans that humans have, sort of as an initial instinct for self-preservation.
Yeah. There's only so many more senior positions, or there's only so many open opportunities for projects and whatnot in an organization. And so supervisor, especially if you're a high potential employee, will want to give you those opportunities to give you the visibility, to give you the career growth and whatnot. And if they know that you have one foot out the door, it would be natural for them to choose somebody else who they know has more longevity in the company or the organization in order to help grow them.
Undoubtedly. Look, when they're putting you into those kinds of positions, they're investing in you, right? And if you have a foot out the door, they're going to be reluctant to make that investment, rather put that into somebody who's going to be sticking around. It's not, there's nothing malicious in that thinking at all. It makes great sense for somebody who's going to be sticking with that company. Why am I investing in somebody who's taking that someplace else to potentially to a competitor? They're going to keep that investment with the internal folks. So the point being, if those are the thoughts you're having, maybe you don't want to share that with your current supervisor, which brings us to the importance one more time. I know we've only mentioned it 100 times, having a board of personal mentors. It's important to have multiple mentors. And so this aligns with the, sort of the healthiest setup for how to approach your supervisor as a mentor. You can think about it in layers, not either or. Your supervisor is your performance mentor. So they're interested in short-term growth and helping you to master your current role, organizational context and understanding. But maybe if you want to think about other things, you might need an external, somebody you don't report to, kind of mentor. So the categories for that might be things like long-term advice and guidance, identity. So for example, if you work for a large company, so you can cut your teeth in that industry, but you have every intent of starting a smaller company in the same space, you don't be telling your supervisor that, by the way, I'm planning to be your biggest competitor really soon. If for instance, be a simple example, you work at Coors Brewing Company in Golden, Colorado. What's the tagline?
I don't know what the tagline is, but Coors Brewing Company in Golden, Colorado.
Okay, however you say that, I'm not from around your parts, but But if your intent is to cut your teeth on brewing by working for someplace like Coors, but you really want to build your own craft beer company, maybe this isn't the time to be sharing that with your direct supervisor at Coors. The other things you might be thinking about, trade-offs between opportunities inside and outside the current organization, whether it's moving to a different division in the current company or moving to a completely different company. Obviously, those questions might be best given to a mentor who is not your direct supervisor. And clearly, that the non-direct supervisor, chances are that's a safe place where you can think out loud and speak candidly about what you like and what you don't like about your current role and your current organization. So the external mentor can help also to navigate the political landscape of the company with a view that's unbounded by your current supervisor's view.
Yeah. So leveraging somebody you don't report to, in other words, leverage them, especially if you're navigating a promotion, if you're considering a pivot within the company or moving to another company. If you're feeling stretched or burned out, that's a great place for you to get guidance and support from your mentor. And then also with figuring out your leadership style. We haven't really talked about this too much yet, but Bill, when you think about how you are going to show up as a leader, if your leadership style differs from your supervisor's leadership style, then get mentoring from somebody other than your supervisor on how to develop as a leader. If you are stuck with your supervisor, but you don't necessarily respect how they are as a leader, then don't share too much with that supervisor, especially about career pivots and such that you want to do, either internal or external to the company.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's likely that in anybody's career, over time, you're going to have supervisors that you have undying respect for, and maybe supervisors you don't. And you certainly can respect them and still think that's not the way I would want to interact with my employees when I become that person, when I become a supervisor. And so, it's just being smart about the kinds of conversations that you're going to have with somebody who's doing your performance evaluations.
Yeah. So ask yourself, are there things I need mentoring on that I wouldn't feel safe or wise discussing with my boss? And if the answer is yes, that's your signal to add another mentor, not to reject your supervisor as one, but add and leverage your supervisor's mentoring in terms of how they evaluate your performance, and add mentoring for the other things that you don't feel safe enough to talk to your supervisor about. And with all of that, Bill, what would we want to bring to our supervisor?
Yeah, so for supervisors, think about performance, execution, and context. Now, this is often more tactical than overall career strategy. Good topics for your supervisory mentor. What does excellent look like in this role for the next 6 to 12 months? Can you give me feedback on specific work or decisions I've made, or leadership moments that you have observed? When everything is feeling urgent, maybe some help with prioritizing the work and how your work is connecting to the team or organizational goals, stretch opportunities that you might have that are inside the team, and visibility. So who should see this work, when should they see it, and how should they see it? And, this obviously is going to work because the supervisor is the one who sees your work up close. They know the politics, the timing, the constraints for what's going on, and they can remove obstacles or open doors that are within the scope of your current tasking. So as you're approaching them, though, things to sort of keep in mind, you want to frame it as curious, not uncertain. I would like to sharpen X skills as opposed to, I really don't know what I'm doing in this part. It doesn't sound like a career growth opportunity. And so you want to be forward looking. You're not this isn't the confessional. You're not trying to confess all your weaknesses to your sponsor or to your
supervisor for I have sinned. No, we don't do that.
You can give it a shot. I don't think that's the bullet train to success, but I'll watch and let you know how it goes.
Now, let me pause and say, if you've done a screw up that is, against company policy, or if there's something that would demonstrate your moral judgment, then of course tell your supervisor that. That's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah, we're not talking about hiding things. We're just talking about being judicious in things where you're uncertain about what your future is going to hold, and you want to make sure that you're not setting yourself up for not getting the help that you need because you're asking the wrong person.
Yeah. So then what do you bring to another mentor outside your direct reporting line?
Yeah, so the sort of three areas I would say is identity, direction, and meaning. And so good topics for the people who are not your direct supervisor are things like long-term career direction, including options that your immediate boss might not benefit from, but would be beneficial to you. You could talk to the non-supervisory mentors about doubts and imposter syndrome problems and confidence gaps that you have. Am I playing the right game here at work? Kind of questions. And also, as we talked about earlier, leadership style and values, particularly if the ones that you think you need to develop don't happen to match up with your current supervisor. If you're experiencing burnout or loss of energy, or you're not sure what's going on is sustainable, these are good questions for people who don't have an investment in your immediate work product. And then, of course, probably the most obvious one is, how do I handle a really, really tough dynamic with that supervisor I have, or even peers? Those are good questions for somebody outside the chain, obviously. And finally, trade-offs or philosophies you'd like to get a different perspective on. So things like career ambition versus the life goals you might have outside of work, money versus meaning in work, and pace versus your personal health. That mentor doesn't have any power over your performance rating. So they can be really honest, and they can invite you to be much more honest. And it helps you sort of back out away from looking at the trees instead of the forest. And so you back out and maybe perform not just performing better where you are, but have a longer horizon than your current supervisor is going to have. And finally, that non-supervisor mentor, they're not going to be hurt or harmed by you choosing some opportunity outside the current part of the organization.
Yeah. So we've talked about when your supervisor is your mentor and what kind of things to ask your supervisor in that mentoring capacity. We've talked about what to bring to those mentors that are outside of your direct line. And now I think, Bill, it's also worth talking about what not to bring to your supervisor, at least most of the time.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, one big piece, and we talked a little bit about this, is this idea of if you're demonstrating you have a foot out the door, don't bring that up to your supervisor just yet. If you say something like, I'm not sure I want to be here long term, again, your supervisor is the one that is helping to fill and provide advocacy for roles that will help people build within the organization in the company. And so if you're saying you're not sure you want to be there long term, you might not get chosen for some of those opportunities.
Yeah, I need to interject just for a second, because a thought that comes to mind is I have seen it, and I've seen it and from employees, I've seen it from seniors, sort of using look, if you don't do this for me, I'm going to be looking for something else. When somebody has come to me in the past with that, generally speaking, they already did have one foot out the door.
Right.
When they're verbalizing, you need to do this for me or I'm out of here, they've already been looking. So frankly, the message from the manager is, okay, they have one foot out the door. That sort of even a mild threat is not going to motivate me to make sure that you stick around necessarily.
It's true.
And I totally recognize, I think it's worth talking about. If you want to go, if you actually do want to stay, then it's not a threat that you're leaving. It's, I don't feel challenged where I am, boss. I would like to be taking on additional responsibilities. I would like to have chances at other opportunities. That's a good conversation to have with your supervisor. Mm-hmm. Not, listen, if you don't give me a better job, I'm out of here. Because by the time you get to saying words like that, most of the managers are going to say that person is already out of here. They're mentally gone already. So it's time to move on to somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another bad idea to bring to your supervisor is any comparison that you might have to your peers, especially framed emotionally. Like, I'm better than John. Why did he get that opportunity and I didn't? Something like that. Not great to bring up to your supervisor.
Yeah, that's another much better one with somebody who is not invested, who perhaps didn't make the choice to pick John instead of you. You're sort of poking them in the nose. How about going to somebody who's not personally invested in the decision that was made?
I should clarify too, I have worked with, my good colleague friends, John. I'm not referring to you.
Sure.
This is the generic John. This is the John Doe.
Okay, got it.
Johns. Yeah.
I'm sure he was not offended.
Yeah. Another idea not to bring to your supervisor is half-formed career pivots. And actually, this kind of goes with what you were talking about a second ago when it comes to having a foot out the door. If you have a half-formed career pivot, don't bring that up to your supervisor. You might want to talk to your mentor about it and say something like, I'm thinking about this, but I have a lot of questions about what that role is like. And so then you get some more information from your mentor about the role itself. But if you just come in half-baked to your supervisor with an idea half-baked, I should say, not you yourself half-baked.
Yeah. Good call. Don't do that. Don't go in half-baked to your supervisor.
Yes. If you come in with an idea half-baked, then that maybe not a good idea to bring to your supervisor. One other idea too that comes to mind, Bill, is this idea that vulnerabilities that could be misread as a lack of readiness. So as an example that comes to mind is something like if I am an engineer and I am asked to take on a project management role, but I don't really know the financial management side of being a PM. That's a vulnerability there that could be read as a lack of readiness in taking on that PM role. Instead, what you could do is talk to your mentor about how do I get better at, how do I understand the financial aspects of project management? What are some resources that I could take on?
Yeah, so I would say that can be a little bit nuanced. You certainly can talk to your supervisor and say, I'm looking for these opportunities and I'm looking for ways to build skills in different areas. It depends on how you deliver the message. I know plenty about how to run a spreadsheet, but running project management finances, I'd like to take some training to make sure I'm up on the steps so that when I'm the project manager, I can do these things. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thought. It really comes down to if it's a vulnerability and you haven't got a clue on how to do it, you might want to take that someplace else, like to a non-supervisory mentor, do the work to figure out how to fix that vulnerability, and then go see your supervisor about how you want to take the job.
Or even it's almost like when it comes to how you bring it to the supervisor, to me, it's a confidence issue. Right? If you're coming to your supervisor with no confidence whatsoever that you can even possibly learn the skill set that you don't have, then that's where the vulnerability comes into play.
Sure, absolutely.
If your language, like you're saying, is around, yeah, I totally want to take on that project management role and I really want to lean into becoming better at the financial management aspect of being a PM, then that's the language to bring to your supervisor. Yeah. So one big red flag to your supervisor is frustration about them or their leadership, unless you have significant trust and bring it in a respectful way. This is a fairly nuanced discussion. If you just don't like your supervisor or their style, but the issues are not fundamentally bad, it's probably not productive to express that frustration. But if, on the other hand, the issues are based on your principles or direction, when your supervisor truly isn't doing the right thing on something that really matters, it's time to speak up. But certainly this can be risky. So you'd only want to make this choice when it does, in fact, matter.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had that experience as the supervisor, but it turned out well. I mean, it wasn't a bad thing. I was speaking to some folks and they were giving me a project brief and I was all of their supervisor because I was the big boss at the time. And somebody had proposed doing something and I said, no, we're not going to do that. I'm concerned about that we're not prepared to do that part of the job. And
can I pause and just say, I'm assuming that you didn't say it in that calm and collected manner that you just expressed in the podcast.
I don't know what you're talking about, Angela. In fact, I know exactly what you're talking about. I tend to get passionate about things when I really care about what's going on. And it's certainly not a surprise to anybody who ever worked with me. In fact, the Myers-Briggs guys in my evaluation said, you're often surprised to find out that people think you're mad at them. And so I wasn't mad at the person when I was saying, we're not going to do that. But evidently I delivered it too passionately. And the good news is for those folks, they had developed a great trust relationship so they could come tell me afterwards and say, why on earth were you ripping him a new one when he was just offering his ideas about how he wants to proceed? I said, I wasn't doing that. I just said, I don't want to do that. Well, everybody in the meeting except you thought you were ripping that guy apart. And so, I mean, it was good because I was actually very pleased that they said, you're delivering that message in a way that's not productive. And so I was able to go back and actually apologize to the entire team and say, in a much calmer way, like I just said a minute ago, I don't want to do it, and here's the reasons why. It's not because I don't respect you guys, or I don't think that you are capable, but I don't think we're ready to take that on. We recovered from it very nicely, but it's to the point of, you want to get to a place where you can tell people that you can tell them when something's off the rails, and it really did matter, because it was really hurting the team, because they were really quite put out with the way that they received the message. And so I was glad we were able to recover from that and have a very, very calm, discerning conversation about what we should do next. So this is an important point, though. There were also other examples where we were getting direction from a customer who was telling us to do something, you're going to do it this way, an engineering solution that they had in mind, that after years of experience, we knew was not going to result in success. Mm-hmm. And we took it back to them and said, this is not going to work out well. We know it because we've tried this path before. Mm-hmm. If you want to do this in this exact way, we'll help you find somebody else to do it. So that is a risky way to approach it. But we were confident because we had built the trust that said, we're not making this up, dude. We're trying to tell you the right thing so everybody's successful. As it turned out, they said, okay, let's do it your way. It is a risky thing, though. I don't want to make light of this discussion when you're speaking to the people who control purse strings or performance evaluations. You want to be very judicious in the way you approach those problems.
Yeah. None of these are bad topics to bring up to a supervisor, but they're just better handled elsewhere first.
Agreed. So I guess the bottom line is, the supervisors can certainly hold mentor-like roles, but we just don't recommend people having the supervisor as their only mentor. This goes back to the idea of getting a personal board of mentors to help navigate all the nuance in life, even all the nuances of a career. So set yourself up to have mentors available with whom you can have candid discussions, not just the people who are in your evaluation chain, who could consciously or not impact your opportunities within your current company. So did we miss anything?
I don't think so. I think we covered it, Bill. And with that, thank you for listening to this episode of Mentoring in Real Life. If you have thoughts or questions, feel free to leave us a comment or send us an email, which we've included in the show notes. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, rate the podcast, and share with a friend. Until next time, help others climb.